Then there's the Vanity Press. This is basically where you pay a printer to publish your book. The advantage is you are in control. A disadvantage is you are spending all of the money. You are paying so much for so many hundred copies of this book to be printed. You promote and distribute the work. You print those flyers, you do those emails, you send out those spams, I hope not. With the Vanity Press, you promote and distribute the work. Nobody else is out there making publicity for you. If you want a full-page ad in Library Journal, you're going to pay for it. But again, the advantage is you're in control. Nobody can tell you, don't take that particular stand, it's not very popular. Nobody can say, this is the style you should be using. So you are in control. Personally, it's not a way I would go. I don't have the money to invest in that. But a lot of people do that, and we receive in our library ads for them all the time. Sometimes the book, the topic is of interest, we might buy that. Usually, as a librarian, we'd say this is from a Vanity Press, it's self-published, there's no peer review process. This guy wrote it in his garage on the weekend. It's probably not going to be very good. We're not going to buy it. Or it may be that the book is wonderful, but the guy has no idea how to do publicity. So we don't get the picture that the book is wonderful, and we don't buy the book. If you don't have the talent for doing the publicity, you probably don't want to go that route. But it is an option. Okay, some tips. Write what you know. If you have trouble figuring out how to unplug the computer, don't write about computers. If you've never worked as a children's librarian, don't write about children's librarianship. If you are a music librarian, if you're a medical librarian, if you're a law librarian, that's what you want to write about. If you're an administrator, that's what you want to write about. If you are the person whose job it is to train the support staff when they are hired in, that's what you want to write about. If you have been in the field for a long time and you have mentored many people who are coming along in the profession, that's what you want to write about. If you're new to the field and you have been mentored either successfully or unsuccessfully, that's what you want to write about. If it's unsuccessful, of course, and you want to keep your job, mask the identity of your mentor, who may be your supervisor, but it's an area you've had some experience in. And if you've had the experience, you can write about it. So write what you know. Find a mentor. I forgot this was coming up, no relation to what I just said about a mentor. But find a mentor to your writing, someone you can work with, perhaps someone who's been published, perhaps someone who is more of an expert in the field than you are, but someone who's willing to work with you. I had the very good fortune when I was at the State Library Network, one of the staff members, not a librarian, who worked in the cubicle across the hall from my office, had worked for a newspaper. She had a degree in English and in journalism. She was working in a library network, but she loved to do copy editing. And she begged me for stuff to edit, both at work, things that I would publish for work, and after work, things that I would publish outside the realm of our office. And even just a few weeks ago, she said, when am I going to get a copy of our next book? So, she's not really an author, not listed as an author, doesn't expect to be, but I do try to give her a thank you and an acknowledgement in print whenever I can. You are very, very blessed indeed if you can find somebody who has that way of thinking. Form a support group. Some of the institutions I have worked for have formed writers' groups. One of the times that works is 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. You might say, oh, groan. Why 5 o'clock Friday afternoon? Because the library closes at 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. Everybody is off duty. Nobody's stuck on the desk for reference or for circulation. So it's a time that's available to people. And it can be in kind of informal time and a way to wrap up the work week. I don't suggest it every Friday afternoon, but maybe once every month, once every couple months. You set the format. Do you do you want to bring something you're working on? Do you want to discuss topics? You decide how you're going to work this. But it can work very, very well. You have to be blunt with each other. I was a member of a writers club once, and every time somebody read one of their poems, the response was, "Oh, that's so inspirational. Oh, that's so beautiful. Oh, I just love that thought." It didn't help anybody, and I was not of that mindset, and I'm thinking, that's really pretty bad. That's drivel. But here was this person going to go out and make a fool of him or herself, submitting this to some publisher that I was 99% sure was going to reject it. So the group was giving no support. But it's wonderful. One of our members of that particular group was an author probably familiar to somebody, a woman now retired from writing and speaking. You may have heard of her, read some of her books, a woman named Jeanette Oak. I don't see any acknowledgement. Yes, somebody's heard of it. Very, very well published in Christian fiction, Christian historical fiction, inspirational fiction. Published, I don't know how many books, 20 or 30 books. She didn't come to our meetings very often. Her philosophy was, why should I come to a meeting and talk about it when I could be home writing? So if that works for you, do that by all means. Write for the journals you read. If you devour every issue of Computers and Libraries that comes your way, that's the journal you want to write for, because that's your mindset. That's the way you're thinking. The same would apply to the book publishers, of course. Write for the publishers whose books you are reading. If you are reading lots of things from Libraries Unlimited, then obviously they're writing things that appeal to you or that are in your area of interest. So you want to be writing for them. Watch for calls. These are the things that I mentioned previously, like that email that I received last week. Sometimes you will find them in the journal. Again, going back to the previous one, write for the journals you read, but read those journals and watch them for calls, particularly at the head of columns, like the review columns. They'll say, we are looking for reviewers in math, or we're looking for reviewers in the general sciences. They'll say the same thing about articles. Publishers will put out calls for particular books. If you see a series that is of interest to you, and you'd say, the one book that's missing in that series is the one on public relations, and I could do that. So pitch them a proposal. The next thing to do, submit that proposal. You do not have to have a completed article or a completed book to market it. Most publishers don't want the completed book or the completed article. They want your proposal. They want you to tell them, this is my idea. This is why I think it's a good idea. This is why I'm qualified to write about it. And this is the target audience. These people are going to buy this article or buy this book. If you can tell them that and make a good case and submit a few sample paragraphs, if it's a book, maybe a sample chapter and a table of contents, the publisher will give you the guidelines. But if you can submit that, then you can get under contract and you can go ahead and write the book. Some people are of the mindset, I'm not going to waste my time writing a book or writing an article that may never sell. So you submit the proposal and you go from there. My particular way of thinking for me personally is I don't like to make a promise that I can't keep. So I want to have the majority of that book or the majority of that article finished or pretty well whipped into shape before I submit the idea. That's where I come from. The problem with that, the downside, of course, is sometimes they say, well, we like your idea, but it needs this particular focus. So then I'm doing a lot of editing. That idea may or may not work for you. But either way, but if you're thinking you have to write the book first and then you go out and market it, that is not at all true. And that's the same for books, for articles, for fiction, for nonfiction. Something else that can be very, very helpful to you, get a co-author. My last several books I have gotten co-authors for. I have one in the works now that somebody said, we want you to write this book. That's not me. I can do 90% of that, but there's 10% of that, which is, in this case, huge, that I couldn't write for. I can't write for that audience because I haven't had that experience. I will write the book, I told the acquisitions editor, if I can get a co-author. I went through several of them before I actually found one that was going to work out. I had one going and she had personal problems, had to back out. So what do? We abandon the project or find somebody else? Well, I asked my peers, are you interested in this? No, I'm not. Well, do you know anybody? And finally somebody knew someone, a woman I've never met. A couple of months ago we both happened to be in San Jose at the same time and still didn't meet. But we found out that our style is collaborative, it works very well together, and you know, we can complement one another. So find a co-author if it's not something that you can go ahead with and write yourself. You know, ask one of your library science professors. Many times these people would love to write something and they just don't have the time. They're preparing for those classes, but they might be willing to co-author. I don't want to speak for them, but it might be something. Okay, here are some helpful books that I want to mention that will help you with your writing. The first one is The Writer's Market. Writer's Market will list publishers and it'll tell you the kinds of manuscripts they're looking for. This is a compilation. The publishers, the editors of Writer's Market have gathered together a lot of the information we've talked about today, some of it from the same sources, and they could tell you, for example, information today is looking for books of this type. And so you've got a one-stop shopping here. A particular one, if this is your niche, Christian Writer's Market Guide. If that's the market you want to write for, pick up this book. There are a number of similar titles. If you just go to Amazon and type in Writer's Market, you'll get a whole bunch of them in different subject areas. Amazon is a good source. I use it frequently. Another one, you should be familiar with this one through your library science classes, still out there, Ulrich's Periodical Directory. It tells you what journals are published, where they're published, when they're published, how much they cost, who publishes them, when they started publication, all kinds of things. A lot of this information is available by another one I didn't list here because I have not seen it personally, at least not recently. If you subscribe to some of the EBSCO databases, you can get a lot of this information through EBSCO about the various journals and where they're published. I don't remember specifically which EBSCO title that is. But use these types of resources to look for a market. It's just a matter of finding your match. Magazines that can be very helpful. There's one called The Writer. You can find it on newsstands or you can get a subscription. It tells you some of the same things. It tells you what different publishers are looking for, when they're going to publish this new series of books, but it also gives you articles by published authors in the field. If you are writing, it's also a journal you might want to write for. But pick up The Writer. I've found it very, very helpful, very useful. A similar one, a major competitor to The Writer, is one called Writer's Digest. Again, articles about how to write, how to break into print. They give you some of the same things that I've talked about today and a lot more tips. This is the key, the bottom line. Just do it. You can do it. You really can. Believe me, if I can, anybody can. I never thought that 20-some years ago when I broke into print in School Library Journal, writing my first audio-visual review of those black and white photographs of Mexico, that I would ever write a book. I always wanted to. But I thought, I don't have anything to say. What would I write about? And things just happened over the years. You know, you get so many white hairs or you lose so many, and you say, you know, I have learned something in the past couple of years. Just do it. That is the key. That a lot of agents only want to be an agent for published writers. So you almost have to be published to get an agent, and sometimes you don't even need an agent. But look into it. You know, certainly look into it if that's something you want to go. If your interest is writing and not doing all of the other stuff, not marketing your book or your article, then get an agent. Along that line, if you're going to write, be prepared to accept rejection. It's not the end of the world when you get rejected. The fact that an article or a book is rejected does not mean that it's bad, necessarily. It might be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It just means that that particular publisher is, what it can mean, that particular publisher is not publishing anything for that particular market at that particular time. I was told that when Louis L'Amour first began writing, that he submitted his first novel to, and I've forgotten the number, was it 27 or 77 different publishers, and it was rejected by all of them. When it was finally published, it was published by the very first publisher he had submitted it to. But time had gone on, and that publisher was now doing Westerns, and the time was right, and the manuscript was right. And of course, Louis L'Amour is a name that's probably familiar to most of us. He wrote more books than I could begin to count. Made more money than I could begin to count. So don't be discouraged by rejection. And don't sit there and wait for the mail. Send it off and forget about it and get busy on your next project. Go on with your life. The first article comes back, okay, check that publisher off the list, move on with the next one. And if finally it's been rejected so many times that you know that that particular topic is not timely anymore, you know, if you're writing about iPods in libraries and the world has moved on to whatever is the next best, greatest, give up, just say, well, you know, it may have been a good idea in its time, but it didn't get published, move on to what's next. You know, if I were telling libraries how to use DOS in their libraries today, I don't think anybody would publish that. So move on to the next thing. It's not something that I've looked into and dealt with a great deal. Some of the journals we've talked about today, in fact, I think all of them, Library Journal, School Library Journal, American Libraries, Computers and Libraries, all have an online version. Selective topics are published online, but not all of them. I know my article on PDAs was not published online. You can see it in the table of contents, but you can't get to it online. Some of these journals are peer-reviewed. Some of the online journals, some are not. So I would say use the same criteria in evaluating any publisher of online journals as you would use for evaluating a publisher of a print journal. It may be a direction you want to go in, it may not. Not an area that I'm very familiar with, but yes, it sounds worthwhile, particularly if they are peer-reviewed. If they're reviewed by their students, I think that's very, very good. You know, even if it's just writing for fun, I published a couple of articles back in when I was getting my MAT with our Graduate Students Association newsletter. I wrote one called "The Joy of Commuting." The subtitle probably should have been "Not." Because twice a week I did a 50-mile commute each way after a full day of work. It was just a humorous little piece, but it was a way to get into print. I got published. I felt good about it. I thought, wow, somebody's interested enough in reading what I have written to actually publish it. So it was a psychological thrill for me. It was a psychological stimulation, encouragement. So I would say any time that you can get published is, in general terms, a good thing, and I would say go for it. Just because you're a library science student or a library science professional doesn't mean you have to publish only in that particular area. What's the guy, he wrote Hunt for Red October, is it John Clancy? Tom Clancy, I'm sorry, who was a lawyer, if I'm not mistaken, right? Wasn't Tom Clancy the one that was the lawyer? Well, does Hunt for Red October have anything to do with that? No, but he took his experience, his education, and turned it into writing fiction. It's the sum total of his persona. He's using that, even though it's totally outside the area, his profession. So use anything that you're interested in. As I mentioned earlier, if it's a... Travel stuff. Sure. Sure. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one thing I meant to mention earlier and did not, photography. If that's your thing, do photography. You know, I've had some of my pictures published in various newspapers that I can think of. You know, it's great. To me, it was an inspiration. To me, it was motivation to go on to do something more. Something that I enjoyed. You know, I enjoy taking pictures. You happen to see one this morning. You know, I put it up there just because I thought it was pretty. And some people said, "Oh, don't use that, it's distracting." Well, I don't care, it was pretty. I was going to use it today, just because I liked it. So, you know, it's something that's inspirational to you. I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. I know it very well, but I'm having a senior moment. Used to be at Indiana University, now retired. I heard him speak once, a well-known library consultant. But he said one time, he said, libraries exist not because people have an insatiable urge to read, but because we have an insatiable urge to write. And that's true. You know, I find that there are things, I just have to write them. I just have to write them. My first book came about because when I was saddled with the job of moving a library, there was nothing in print that would help me. There were, you know, articles on how we done it good at St. Susie's Girls' School by carrying the books across the street on our lunch hour. And that was the bulk of the literature at the time. And I thought, there's got to be something better than this. Well, the only thing that I had seen better than that had been out of print for 30 years. So I thought, you know, I need to do this. And I guess I started a trend because now there are half a dozen books in print on moving a library. You know, I started the trend. But you know, it just had to come out. It was something I had to write about. I'd done all this research, and I thought, why not pull it together? Why not make it a little more formal, you know, without being too formal, which is not my style, and going forward with it. So sometimes there's just that compelling force in you that pushes you forward and has to come out. I don't think that there's a definite yes or no on that. You know, he might think it's really important that you do that. She might not care at all. Who are you applying to for your next job? Are you applying to him or are you applying to her? You know, should you care what he thinks or what she thinks? You know, if she's your supervisor, then you probably should care. And you want to do something that's going to carry weight with her because she's your supervisor. You might not need those points. You know, you might just say, I want to do this because I want to do this, and you go ahead with it that way. But yeah, I would say at the same time, keep your eyes open. Look for those calls. Look for those opportunities. And something I didn't mention is you're networking with people. You know, I always find, after, again, nearly 30 years in this profession, that the greatest value of any conference, whether it's ALA or an interlibrarian or CLA, the greatest benefit comes when I'm not in those meetings. It comes in the hallway, it comes over the dinner table, it comes at the reception. It's that personal interaction when somebody says, oh, you're working on that? I didn't know that. Let's get together. Let me send you an email because I've been doing research on that. Those liaisons, as networking, that's where the real value is. You know, we go to those meetings, we learn a lot, but it's that personal networking that leads to something. Go to those exhibitors and say, you know, I've been thinking a lot about publishing something in the area of. Are you guys doing anything like that? Well, no, we're not. Well, do you know who might be? Because publishers know a lot about the competition. They make it, you know, they have to stay in the business. So ask them, they might refer you. And some of those editors are friends. Or maybe the guy at Information Today used to be the editor, the acquisitions editor for Scarecrow Press. And he knows. So again, make those networks. So that's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but it ties in a lot of ways. Something I've wanted to do all my life. You know, I can write for librarians that have master's degrees, but I cannot write for children. You know, seems ironic, but it takes a very, very special talent. And I just, at least at this point, let me be kind to myself and say I have not yet developed it. Talk to the publishers, go to the exhibits, pick up those books, go to the library, read those books, find out what they're writing, and say, what's missing? You know, if you have children of your own, or nieces or nephews or grandchildren or whatever you have, say, what would I like to show them a book about, and is it available? You know, use your real world experiences and then put it together. And again, these same tips that I just mentioned, the writers group, the co-author, the mentor, talking to those editors, use whatever's at hand. Sometimes in the newspaper, in the calendar column, where they talk about the different meetings that are coming up during the week, you can find that there's a writers club, and just go to them. I don't know, I've not tried this, but it's quite possible that somebody submitted something to the local television station because they do calendar of events and so on. They may have the information, they may just not publish it because they say, well, there are 12 people in this group, it's not something worth announcing publicly. But call the TV station or the radio station and ask them. Go to the library reference desk. You know, we've got a big public library right down the street, whichever way that is from here, in this windowless room. I think it's over there. You know, say, are you aware of any writers groups in the area? They probably are aware of something, but you know, just ask. If you ask enough people enough times, eventually you'll find somebody. But yeah, that would be a good way. I would say go for it.